Alright baby, we're officially back to the Pokemon Marathon here, as today we'll be covering one of my favorite generations of all time, Pokemon Generation 4, which, yeah, would officially debut on the Nintendo DS. Though officially debut is less like it, as really Pokemon already had a stronghold on the DS market. From the Pokemon Ranger series to Pokemon Dash and even the Mystery Dungeon games making a return with the Explorer series, the DS was the commodity back in the day. 2006 and 2007 would then give us Generation 4, Pokemon Diamond and Pokemon Pearl, and later in 2009 we would have the definitive edition Pokemon Platinum, which is the one that I'll be focusing on for today. So in case it wasn't that obvious, this was the generation of Pokemon that I remember growing up with the most, as I would be with like a bunch of my friends in like an after school program, and we were all like huddled together with our Nintendo DS's, and we would just battle and trade against each other, and we would just be in that little corner until like the hoot hoots were out and about, just to get you an idea how long we would be playing these games for. That said, despite my nostalgia and memories for this generation, I didn't actually start with Pokemon Diamond or Platinum right away. It was the Mystery Dungeon Explorer series, Explorers of Sky specifically, that piqued my interest and made those my very first Pokemon games to experience. I'll save more of my thoughts on the Explorer series another time, but you bet your ass I'm going to be making at least a 1 hour long video on that alone. Like listen, those games were peak, and God bless those games too. When I saw a couple of friends of mine playing the mainline games at our local after school program, it was then that I wanted to cash in and check them out for myself. So I went ahead and asked my parents for a copy of Pokemon Diamond that we bought used at a local mall, and later Pokemon Platinum for my 10th birthday at Best Buy. I even got Soul Silver that same year, since I heard a brand new Pokemon game was releasing at the time, seeing all the commercials they had in the bunch with the Pokewalker ad and the Sprouse twins hyping it all up. God, that really was an era looking back, wasn't it? Because of all of this, you can say that I am looking at this with a very tinted lens because of how much I grew up with this generation, but at the same time, it's because of this generation that I wanted to cover the Pokemon games in the first place. There was something about Generation 4 that initially blew my mind as a kid growing up in the mid to late 2000s. The graphical design alone is completely different than its Game Boy counterparts to start there, utilizing a 2D to 3D landscape all in order to showcase the grandness of the adventure, showing more of a verticality in its design this time. Visual scaling in this generation is the gist of its framework, as now more than ever, Pokemon began to feel like a larger-to-life journey that you can just play on the go, it seemed, which, to jump ahead a bit, Generation 5 would rapidly improve upon. And it was this generation that also introduced us to wireless features, completely removing the need for link cables when it came down to battling and trading with others. No, just go right ahead and get those DS's close to each other and touching tips, and you got yourself a new Pokemon in a matter of seconds, making completing the Pokedex in these games that much easier. The thing that I remember the most about the wireless features was the battling and trading aspects, but you could also use it for the Grand Underground and mess around with friends too while collecting goodies like fossil Pokemon. In hindsight, I think Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, the remakes of these games, did make this a lot better to explore through, which is why I won't really be mentioning it too much in great detail here. And that's also the extent I'm giving praise to those god-awful remakes. One thing I forgot about Platinum now revisiting it was how slow it was sometimes. Notwithstanding the usual HM count, which we'll definitely talk about later, the pacing of Gen 4 isn't as fast as I remembered it being, shockingly. So for the sake of making things relatively faster for this review, I decided to hop back on the emulator and ensure that I got the fast forward enabled for all the grinding and obnoxious bits this game does have. I think this is one of the smartest moves I've done to avoid burnout as we get to the other mainline games to cover, and also I just don't want you guys to wait any more than you already have for this review. But besides all of that, now let's finally dive into Pokemon Platinum and revisit my childhood. The adventure this time is set in the Sinnoh region, a region that by and large is one of the most expansive ones I've encountered from the earlier games. Due to the nature of this being on the DS now and having that extra 3D into the mix, Sinnoh feels like a step up from its predecessors. Towns and cities look a lot more vibrant than before, and routes definitely have more of a presence in their designs, giving a nice foreground and background detail whenever you're exploring. Taking the spotlight now for this adventure are Lucas and Dawn, who really have nothing else going for them and actually work as assistants to Professor Rowan, our Pokemon professor for this game, who then wants them to go out there, collect Pokemon, and fill up the Pokedex, yada yada yada, all the usual stuff you'd find in these games. This leads to the process of obviously collecting the 8 gym badges and becoming the Pokemon champion as you would, but it really feels all secondary as opposed to being the main focus. Really, the only one who feels more passionate about this kind of stuff is Barry, our rival for this generation, who I think he had a little bit too much of the Coca-Cola, if you know what I mean. An energetic buffoon that is good-natured by heart, Barry seeks to prove his worth of becoming a strong Pokemon Pokemon trainer, which I low-key love about him. From the moment we start our journey with him to seeing him bust down and help us stop the evil team from their plans, he's the hype man of our journey so long as, you give him a battle from time to time. Though my brother Anarchius, at least say goodbye to your mom before you leave at least, goddamn! I'm just glad his mom isn't Paldean because he definitely would have gotten the chancla. Depending on who you pick, of course, the other acts as a supporting character, so since I picked Lucas for this journey, Dawn obviously took that role, which I found very endearing to her characterization. And for Platinum exclusively, we meet this weird looking stranger by the name of Looker, a detective working for the International Police that I wonder why it took them this long to be a thing. Where the hell were you guys 3 games ago? I could have used your help! On occasion, you do meet up with Looker as you're going through the motions, and he makes the little stuff in the story all the more enjoyable, like how he runs around in the city areas and pretends to hide in literal plain sight. I found these moments amusing and really kept the story going in a manner that didn't really tire me out. And by postgame too, he makes one hell of a moment that makes him legit one of my favorite side characters of this entire generation. Yeah, you go, Detective Looker, but I have to ask, how the hell did you turn yourself into a rock? But with my trusty starter Pokemon on my side, the adventure awaits us in the Sinnoh region, and man, it is just as I remembered it growing up. Again, the sprite work for one thing is what I absolutely adore in these games, bringing to light the step in quality when compared to the previous ones. The towns and cities of Sinnoh never looked so good for a Pokemon game starting out on the DS, and I like how much it can be emphasized without so much compromising the artistic direction. Frame rate is dropped though, having 30 FPS rather than 60 like how it was back in Emerald. Personally, didn't see this as a big issue during my playthrough, but it does make the game slower when you see how fast the animation can be from time to time. I remember somewhat feeling like the game sometimes used Chaos Control or something because what the hell is this? I also love the detail this game brings to the world of Pokemon, far more than what Gen 3 did back in the GBA and Gen 2 back on the Game Boy Color. Not to bag down the graphical design for those games, I admit they got their charm, but we are on better hardware now and Gen 4 just has a better appeal to it. Exploring through Sinnoh again was pretty fun and definitely not as wacky as Hoenn as I remembered it. For one thing, we're back with the day and night cycle, which is something that I still to this day don't understand why they removed it entirely in Gen 3, but hey, it's back in action here. You got the return of the bike, except now you can change gears without having to go to the bike shop for it, which was perfect for those moments where you wanted to breeze by routes. Some cities were a blast to go back to, like Jubilife City and its massive metropolitan atmosphere. This always left an impression on me as a kid, and even now because of the grandiose nature compared to the other locales. There was Eterna City and its homely vibes paired with a large Dialga statue as part of its town square that I also enjoyed walking around for a bit. We even have small towns in between on our journey like Solaceon Town and the ruins you get to explore and read unknown language instead of Braille, to even the cold temperatures of Snow Point City and the nice beaches of Sunny Shore. Yeah, Sinnoh is the best place in my opinion to start your Pokemon journey. It could be my bias for this gen speaking here, but I also think it's because of that blend of 2D and 3D thanks to DS's capabilities that makes this game one of the more intriguing ones to visit. That said, some locations do make a return like the Safari Zone, the Ghost Tower, and the Cycling Road, giving us a sort of routine experience that I don't think detracts as much from the already unique elements Sinnoh provides. The same courtesy is extended to the beauty contest, as much like Emerald, I didn't mention these because I didn't fully bother to care as much, but hey, I at least took some of my Pokemon out for a stroll on Amity Square to pass the time. But while Hoenn was in the water, this time you're dealing with the mountain ranges of Sinnoh, again emphasizing the verticality this generation has in terms of scale. It does mean going back and forth between the two sides of Sinnoh, as you'll be crossing through Mount Coronet to get to certain areas and progress, as well as having the standards HMs like in the previous games. And we're back with 8 HMs for this journey, by the way, which is more of the standard than it is bothersome. Besides the usual like Cut, Fly, and Surf, in this lineup we got new ones like Rock Climb, which is for that vertical exploration whenever you see these patches of small rocks in your path. You know what? Makes sense, I get it, we're mostly up in the mountains like I said, this one is totally fine, but the one that I don't get is the other new HM, the Fog. Why? I mean, mechanically speaking, sure, is not that different from Flash, as the fog is used to clear up certain weather conditions to make traversing easier. But unlike Flash, if you don't end up using the fog, you lose accuracy whenever you're in battle, making the fights already long as they are. To be honest, this felt unnecessary as I had to carry at least 2 Pokemon that were HM exclusives throughout my journey, but at the same time, I already knew this was inevitable. My first HM Pokemon in this case was a Bidoof because when it evolves into B-Barrel, it can use up to 4 HMs alone. Man, talk about carrying in the team on its back, you'll love to see it. And in terms of the HM Fly and Defog, I ended up catching a Starly early in the adventure and then evolved into our Staraptor. Again, it was inevitable given how conditioned I am for playing the older games, and I know the later games do away with most of the HMs anyways, but it definitely wasn't something I was fond of then and now as I'm revisiting these games. But along with your travels, a sinister plot begins to unfold, this time with a mysterious man you encounter early in the adventure by the name of Cyrus, the leader of Team Galactic who yearns to create a new world, or at least that's what Cyrus wants in the end, as the others just blindly follow his ass like he's part of the Pokemon gospel or something. Seriously, Team Galactic is as inconsequential as they will ever be, as their actions don't justify the means of Cyrus's goals, and they're more quick to gain his favor than actually commit any real crime. Compared to the other guys from the previous generation, I do find them to be somewhat consistent, as they feel more involved in the plot this go around, making sure they go out of our way to wreak some chaos. It's just that for most of the time they do show up, they don't act like a real threat, acting more like a band of teenage misfits with no sense of direction thanks to the ambivalence of Cyrus's ambitions, which works, sure, I guess, but not in the way that feels intended. Plus, how can I take them so seriously with that green bolt cut of theirs? Professor Rowan was right, these are some sorry specimen. As for Cyrus, well, while we know of his goal to be of I shall rid this world and begin anew, his rationale isn't explained like at all. For as much as we give the Team Galactic members some shit for not knowing what's going on, we're just as confused as to why Cyrus does things, and while one can argue it's explained through subtext, it's not apparent the minute you encounter him. He does this by vaguely expressing his dislike for the world, wishing to recreate it under his image, and in the process captures the Lake Guardian Pokemon just to set up a Zoom meeting with the Pokemon of Time Dialga and the Pokemon of Space Palkia, all on top of the Spear Pillar in Mount Coronet. This is done so he can harness their power and go through his plans, but all this is stopped suddenly when a large black hole erupts and a third legendary Pokemon shows up to stop the chaos, none other than Giratina, who is summoned as if to say, "Who disrupts my fucking sleep?" And you know what? As a kid watching this in 2010, I remember pissing my pants when this moment occurred because Giratina just pops out like a co-worker, except this time he feels like a member of the Five Nights at Freddy's crew. Cyrus and the protagonist are then sent on a voyage through the Distortion World, a place where time and space ceases to be, but it's really just a bunch of floating rocks, all in order to calm down the legendary Pokemon and then stop Cyrus's plans for good. Wait a minute, that's it? Really? That's all I had to do to stop you from recreating the world? Beat your ass in a different dimension? Wow. Wow! Okay, but to be fair though, he at least did a lot better compared to what Maxie and Archie were doing. After all that was said and done, Cyrus then vows to fulfill his plans and raises a fit in protest, but he doesn't show up after we all leave in the Distortion World and nothing of consequence ever happens to him since. Guess enslaving the legendary beings of time and space to ensure you have your new perfect world isn't really that big of a crime in the world of Pokemon, it seems. Oh my god, that was a sentence. But once the whole world saving is done, thanks to the efforts of a 10-year-old, we continue back to where we left off as we claim our 8th gym badge and make our way to the Pokemon League through the Victory Road, and in the same way as... Whoa, that was a flash of deja vu. Okay, so I don't know about you guys here, but it is pretty crazy seeing just how similar Pokemon Generation 4 is compared to Generation 3 in like some aspects here and there. You have the opposite gender protagonist being relegated to supporting character, as I already said, and a third character as a rival similar to May and Wally. The evil team is nothing but a bunch of cartoon characters with the aim of reshaping the world to some capacity, but are then fooled by their superiors trying to awaken the power of literal gods. And then you enter the Pokemon League through a waterfall, and the champion has a Milotic that I now have PTSD about. Anyways, on to the Elite Four and champion I go for this game, and honestly, didn't care much about these guys as I did then, and certainly did not care about them even now. They're much cooler looking compared to Generation 3's, I mean I'll give them that, and one of them is noticeable in the story, which is Flint being the 8th gym leader's best friend who asks that we give him a proper Pokemon challenge. He's also Ronald McDonald in his universe, and that makes me laugh because look, bro's fro is really doing him numbers like how Mirror B did back in the Coliseum games. But the other Elite Four members, I just wiped their Pokemon and didn't even look back, honestly. Shout out to Bertha though for being a ground type Elite Four and reminding me again how much of a fight she gave me as a kid and still now. And also fun fact about her, she's related to Agatha from Kanto. Yeah, that's a thing. But now the champion is within our reach after beating the Elite Four, and it's none other than... Cynthia. Easily the best champion of the entire franchise, and no, I won't elaborate any further. I mean, look at her. She is aces, her team are aces, her Garchomp alone is my sleep paralysis demon, and she has a sick battle theme to boot. Hell, her entrance when you start to approach her is so damn foreboding and really seals the deal that this is the one battle you're never forgetting. I like how compared to the previous generations too, she is there to help the player out from time to time, handing out a Pokemon egg in Eterna City to then letting us know of any suspicious activity going on around one of the lakes near Pastora City. My favorite bits with her were always going to Celestic Town to give an old charm to her grandmother, and in order to do that, you had to calm down these Psyducks that are blocking the path by giving them the secret potion. Now, what is in that potion? The world is not gonna know. And I love how she jumps in the most opportune time to help calm down Giratina in the Distortion World and stop Cyrus, though I wish you did all that shit a little sooner because I was getting clapped left and right, what the hell? But at the end of it all, she is what I think is the definition of who a Pokemon champion should be, and I think Game Freak took notes off of that in the upcoming generations. An absolute girl boss that really steals the show. Speaking of involvement, I also like how involved the gym leaders are in this game too. Seeing them interact in several locations you wouldn't thought possible made for some fun world building that I think Gen 3 lacked in that department with the whole Norman and Brendan bit, as well as seeing Barry be that sugar addict he normally is whenever you head to different towns on your journey. It all feels like you're a part of the adventure this time rather than being an afterthought, even though technically speaking you're still an uninteresting protagonist with no real backstory of your own here. But still, the adventure from start to finish in this game, what a nostalgic trip. The Pokemon roster in this game feels complete as this generation really pulled all stops on expressing the regional Pokemon as well as the ones we've encountered in the past. Everyone you face has a unique roster to battle against, and it doesn't make the adventure that tedious, especially with the newer sprite work and animation for each and every Pokemon. Plus, I think it's also because I just love these designs of the Sinnoh exclusive Pokemon. You know, there's just something about them that speaks to me in a way I'm sure many felt when they played the previous generations. From a beaver with the goofiest smile on his face to a bunch of snails that are the literal definition of Eastside website, don't fuck with them, they got gang signs. A skunk that rips ass every time you encounter one, that was something I'll never unhear. You even got a cool thunder cannon and a rabbit that makes Lola Bunny from Looney Tunes have a run for her money. Seriously, generation 4 Pokemon just have everything you want and more. Like there's even this balloon Pokemon named Drifloon, I believe, that has an interesting Pokedex entry. Like, let me go read it real quick. It tugs on the hands of children to steal them away. However, it gets pulled around instead. Oh God. Oh no. We gotta go to the Valley Windworks to see what the girls do. Oh my God. Oh, thank God. In Platinum, there are even new evolutions for Pokemon. You got Magmortar and Electivire for Magmar and Electabuzz, Mamoswine for Piloswine, Rhyperior for Rhyhorn, Tangrowth for Tangela, and so on and so forth that I find myself still amazed to see them in action to this very day. And looking back at my revisit with Pokemon Platinum here, it was fun going back to a time where I was a kid, and so for the sake of building the team for this adventure, I went back and collected my original Platinum team. Yeah, so what that meant was, for my starter in this generation, it was back to the water route with a penguin Pokemon Piplup, which I have to say as the better evolutionary lineup compared to Chimchar and Turtwig. I'm sorry for all the fans out there who love Torterra and Fernape, but Empoleon slaps hard in its design. Its moveset is also very great for battling, and I'm just a fan of penguins. And look, he even tanked Cynthia's Garchomp's Earthquake and one-hit KO her with his Ice Beam. What a badass. You think the other starters are gonna do that? No. Alongside Empoleon Dynamite was an Eevee that I got in Hearthome City that I evolved near the Moss Rock in Eterna Forest to get my good old pal Leafeon, one of the new evolutions for this generation. The other being the Ice-type Glaceon, which is obtained by evolving Eevee near the Ice Rock in Route 216. This was my Grass-type for this generation, and look, I love its design compared to the other evolutions too. I can appreciate a Flareon, Jolteon, or hell, even an Umbreon any day of the week, but Leafeon has a fresh design, no pun intended, to it that makes me appreciate it all the more now. Its Pokedex entry is really funny to read because it says that they're not a fan of fighting, but my man Automon was throwing hands left and right like he was standing on business. I mean, look at his attack stats. Pacifist my ass. I went ahead and hatched an egg you get from Riley and Iron Island to then get my true homeboy Lucario, which I will stress this now, he will be a repeat moving forward. A steel fighting type hybrid and a design that is just fucking iconic. Lucario to me is my true starter Pokemon because of how much he impressed me as a kid and left that impression to me to this very day. Honestly, I can't wait to see you again in Generation 5 and keep up the good work, my friend. I also got another egg early in the adventure from Cynthia, which would hatch into a Togepi, 3 and then evolve into a Togekiss, the newest evolution it also got for this generation. This acted as my flying type, and I also love its design very much, and its Pokedex entry continues to warm my soul every time I read it. Though it is sad nowadays that the Pokedex entry has changed slightly to, I guess, resemble the social commentary that's going on in the world, but you know what? It's just nice to see it smile every single freaking time. As I explored through the underground gathering footage for it, I made sure to find a skull fossil in order to revive one of my favorite fossil Pokemon, Cranidos, so I can then evolve it into Rampardos, a much bigger dinosaur than it already was. A pure rock type Pokemon, which means it's vulnerable to practically everything, he was still perfect for flying types, ground types, steel types, and even his own rock type compadres when it comes to his moveset. He was also the trusty owner of the mighty Earthquake spell, and I like how he has a smile on his face knowing he has a large ass forehead. Just look at that dome on my boy. My final Pokemon buddy making a comeback was a Weavile, the evolution to Sneasel that also was its debut in this generation. An Ice Dark dual type with strong speed and attack stats, he was my glass cannon in this generation, and my final encounter because of how far into the game you can get one. First of all, you have to get a Sneasel, which are located near Route 216, and then get a Razor Claw, where you either have to wait until Victory Road to get one, or if you look hard enough, it can be found after the Cyrus fight in Veilstone City. You will then have to level up Sneasel at night while holding the Razor Claw, and boom, you finally got yourself the Weavile. Congrats. He was also the edgy team member for this generation, which looking back at my Gen 3 and Gen 2 roster, it now makes sense where I got the whole stigma of having that one party member that sticks out from the rest of them. And thanks to my Weavile is how we won the fight against Cynthia too, so the respect is still earned by my homeboy even today, and look at my team bask in its glory of becoming the new champion of Sinnoh again after 14 years. But the overall adventure isn't as bad as I remembered it, being as formulaic as before. I mean, you got the type advantages to deal with, the natures and abilities to get familiar to, and all the jazz that was introduced from the previous generations. What Gen 4 did have as a massive improvement though was the battling components, not so much the animations and the such, since I find them to be a slight step up from Gen 3's, but really the whole structure of it is what I'm getting at. Gen 4 introduces a special and physical split, something that is seen more in the competitive scene than it is for most casual players. So for Pokemon here, special and physical moves were based on their attack and special attack stats. So if a Pokemon has a higher special attack stat, then special moves are more of their forte. Again, this is all competitive play talk here, as for casual players, you don't really care much about this in the long run, but it drastically changes the playing field a lot for most Pokemon and what they can learn in the process. Back in Generation 3, this was done where certain typings were either physical or special attackers, making grass and psychic type Pokemon special users and fighting and ground type exclusively physical. See, these I completely understand back in the day, but also in Generation 3, for whatever reason you had Ghost as physical and Dark as special, which doesn't make any real sense at all. Like, what the hell is that line of thinking? What that meant was moves like Shadow Ball, yes, Shadow Ball was a physical move, while moves like Night Slash were considered special. But now in Gen 4, that is reworked so that it's relegated to the status it rightfully deserves. And this system was the one I'm glad to see Game Freak rework so that every Pokemon can have more tricks up their sleeves alongside their attach abilities and natures. In regards to post-game, which yes, that is something you have after you beat Cynthia by the way, this is where I find a lot more enjoyment out of Gen 4's post-game content that I did back with Gen 3's. After beating the main game, you're given the national decks like last time, handpicked by Professor Oak this time, who decided to make an appearance of his own, flexing and I guess showing you that the Pokemon Collectathon has only just begun. The Battle Frontier is also back in business in this generation, which much like last time, I didn't really do much. Not for the same reason as Gen 3 where the battle fatigue got me then, but more so because I didn't think of it much back then and didn't really care for it much now either. There is additional story content though in the post game regarding the aftermath of Team Galactic that I found pretty engaging compared to what Emerald did, or rather didn't do for that matter. After Cyrus dips into who the fuck knows where, Team Galactic is still up to no good again as they're now under the supervision of Charon, who honest to god I completely forgot about his ass. He shows up as a background character, rarely making any real significance to the plot, but for post game I guess Game Freak felt bad for him since he's the guy in charge now and seeks to do something with Heatran, a legendary Pokemon that's up hidden in Stark Mountain. With the help and assistance of the mighty Child Buck, you then do your usual do-gooding, and once you catch or beat Heatran, then all is one as Looker suddenly comes in to arrest Charon and those who are working under him. Oh my god, yes! Police are finally doing their freaking job in the Pokemon world, and I also feel so bad for Charon to be the one to be made as an example here. But after that whole fiasco is over, you got nothing much other than the usual post-game content. You got the Battle Frontier making its return as I mentioned, as well as catching the remaining legendaries that are in your way. Now, the Battle Frontier in this game I actually like. Its design is massively improved upon, making a stark contrast between its initial debut back in Emerald, and the characters you face off like Palmer, Barry's dad, have some of the best designs out there. But again, like the previous generation, I did not bother much here because I wasn't into the whole battling, especially with how much Cynthia whooped my ass. Yeah, I was not gonna do a deep dive into this one. As for legendary Pokemon in this generation, there wasn't much that I was able to catch, considering that for some of them, you had to literally go out of your way to get them. Yeah, the Nintendo DS era gave us the event Pokemon for the first time, something that nowadays is lost to time given just how easy it is to transfer Pokemon from one game to the next. I would love to go over these guys in full detail some other day, but they aren't a 100% necessity unless again you want that Pokedex completion. But for the legendaries that you can obtain through the game's main story and post-game, well, you sure got a nice variety. You have Dialga and Palkia being catchable just outside of Spear Pillar, which I found very enjoyable to go through and find compared to Groudon and Kyogre. There was also Heatran to face in Stark Mountain and post-game, like I said. This one was pretty easy to phase too. You got Rotom and Eterna's Forest Abandoned Mansion that you can only find at nighttime, and what I love about this legendary is that for some reason, if you take it to the Galactic H2 in Eterna City, it could become a fucking washing machine. That's actually pretty base. But then we got the Lake Guardian Pokemon, and okay, here's the thing about them. Two of them, Uxie and Azel, are your standard encounters as they wait for you inside the caverns of their respective locations and having respective battles with them. But the third one, Mesprit, man, fuck her, because she's a goddamn roaming legendary, and it doesn't stop there, as later when you obtain the national dex in post-game, your ass got the Kanto Bird Trio as roaming legendaries too. And then there's also Cresselia here, who is also another roaming legendary. Come on! With the marker map app on your Pokédex device, you have a rough idea on where they are compared to the previous game, so I will give them that, but the back and forth to get them to where you need to be, plus the possibility of encountering any of them, is so damn tedious. No, this was where the review was getting to me, because I was conflicted on whether or not I should catch them, but you know what? I manned up, I did it, I caught Mesprit and Cresselia at least after some blood, sweat, and fucking tears, but I did not bother at all with the Kanto Bird Trio. They can kiss my ass for all I care, I got shit to do. But despite how you might feel about this, what bears repeating is that Platinum offers a lot to the player, and at the end of the day, it's up to you if you decide to head out and do all those things. It reminds you that this is one of the more beefier Pokemon adventures that I think gives enough to satisfy the experience without doing too much to overstay its welcome, providing a well-balanced middle ground in terms of presenting the typical Pokemon formula. However, I should stress a typical Pokemon adventure, because if you're thinking of the competitive scene or doing the whole Pokemon Collectathon, then well, good luck, because I think Platinum is a mixed bag in that department. This was again the generation I grew up with and the first set of mainline games that I ended up playing, but I know that for some out there, this is considered a Gen 3 2.0 given its similarities. It does the Pokemon formula down to a T, and in some ways, it's considered a very safe Pokemon game structurally and mechanically, despite the physical and special split, which again is more for the competitive. After this revisit though, I am glad that my love for this generation remains the same, and my experience ended up being a lot better than it was before, but the cracks have shown over time as I got older. I don't think I'll revisit this game anytime soon despite my enjoyment of them, and if I were to revisit Gen 4 one day, it would most likely be with either Heart Gold, Soul Silver because of how much those games left an impression on me. Johto never looked so good as it did back on the DS, and this was my first time experiencing Johto with the whole Gen 4 mechanics, and it makes for one hell of a good time too, even more than BDSP, believe it or not, which again are the remakes of Gen 4 on the Nintendo Switch that I don't want any of you guys touching, even if you do want a Sinnoh experience. Yeah, avoid those fuckers like the plague, and if you want a modern Sinnoh experience, I recommend Legends Arceus ironically, because that is way better than whatever they did with Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. Still, if you are going to experience Generation 4 in any capacity for that matter, I still believe Pokemon Platinum is a solid enough RPG experience that will leave a very satisfying smile by the end of it. But the marathon is not done yet, as we have another generation to look forward to in our Pokemon journey here, that being Generation 5, with Pokemon Black and Pokemon White to cover for next time, which is also the generation of Pokemon that I know of at least that have proper sequels to them about a year later, but obviously that's going to be a conversation for another time. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, love you all to 120, stay safe and sexy out there, have fun, do good, and take care. Also, 5 Robin legendaries, Game Freak, 5 legendaries? What the fuck?